Yo, I'm Toycat, and to be honest, Hytale was always set up for success. After launching their announcement trailer in 2018, it got 16 million views, but somehow has left the community with nothing but distress, because after 7 years of active game development, we've seen nothing but images, concepts, and promises that we now know will never be fulfilled, because the game has gone entirely to waste. A lot of people are immediately jumping to the idea that this must be their Chinese parent company having bought them just to kill the game, but after seeing the scale of the losses at Hypixel Studios, these are public, and after seeing what many who worked on Hytale have said, it seems like the story is just a bit deeper and sadly just a bit darker. And so today I want to go into exactly what caused Hytale to fall, and let's do that right after I mention that you can subscribe to the channel to see more Minecraft adjacent news like this, and also that obviously the story of Hytale is one you might not know. Hypixel are by far the most popular Minecraft server, and so when they announced they were creating an entire game of their own, many in the community were hyped, and this hype led to Riot Games, famous for League of Legends and Valorant, to decide to purchase a stake in the company and to invest a huge amount of money into it. This money then was put back into making Hytale better, something we've seen in the Hytale blog, that they've been very transparent about sharing how their development has gone over the last 5 years, and they crucially said in 2024 that they had gotten to the point where they were getting close to things being playable and testable, and they said by the end of the year things should be testable. However, despite that fact, we are now in mid-2025, and the CEO of Hypixel Studios, Noxy Woxy, has simply said that they ran out of time. That is a wild thing to say about a game that's been in development for 7 years, by the way, but as no one else wants to buy the Hytale name, it seems as though it is going to go away, and as I did my investigation into why, it quickly became clear that there were 3 big reasons, and we're going to start with the smallest one that quickly got very big, because scope creep was very real. Hytale was initially starting its development in 2018 with a planned 2021 release date. However, as that release date drew near, they decided to make a bold step of undertaking a deep investigation into all aspects of Hytale to ensure the game lived up to the experience and expectations that the community had set, and they concluded that no, actually it would not, and so they rewrote the entire engine from scratch, moving from C# and Java, that they were more familiar with from the Hypixel side of things, into C++, which was a more performant language that would allow them to produce it across multiple platforms, and which would be better for supporting updates in the future. In other words, they figured they could make a bigger, better game later, rather than a smaller, more functional and playable game now, and despite the huge cost in deciding not to release something that people could buy, they decided that this was the right move to make, and as we've seen over the few years of development since then, they have made huge strides in basically every part of the game engine to make sure that it is the best game and the best platform possible to build something big on top of. They wanted to learn from the mistake that Minecraft made in the beginning, and so to do that, they spent years and years building the perfect architecture, but that's the thing about scope creep. Continually building a bigger expectation of what your game should be means that you can always have a better and better vision, but that gets further and further away from reality, and so even as they were developing the game, they were getting further and further away from actually releasing it. Which is yet another important reminder that sometimes perfect can be the enemy of good. You might want to make the best thing in the world, but if by trying to do so you end up making nothing, then actually you've done the exact same as doing nothing. Sometimes it's better to make something good that gets better than to make something perfect that never gets made, and crucially, this is something that you could apply to the management team at Hytale as well. This is something that has been called out by Dev/Null, the former security and IT lead. They specifically came out and said, what could possibly go wrong when you hire new leadership that thinks the original team is incompetent? Oh, the whole project ends up going in circles until it dies. The community should be angry at the mismanagement that stole the opportunity for Hytale to flourish. This sounded an awful lot like it was criticizing Riot Games, but they actually said that Riot Games was a pleasure to work with, from the people to the leaders. They understood the power of empowering and giving folks agency. The issues were all internal to Hytale's leadership. This is a bold claim, and although we could back it up with more anecdotal evidence and say, well, the game director definitely clarifies they had the best team in the field, and so clearly it has to be management responsible, I actually think it's very hard to make a full claim based on just anecdotal evidence, and so unfortunately we can't learn what's happening inside of these big companies because they are private, and so what they choose to make public is up to them, except if they live in a jurisdiction where they have to file certain public information. And as it turns out, Hypixel Studios is based in Derry/Londonderry, which is technically a part of the United Kingdom, which means they have to file with Companies House. This is an important part of public transparency because companies are entities that sort of get to act like people, so it's important that certain things be transparent, and that includes their most most recent accounts. Now that the company is gone, we can see exactly how crazy these are. If you don't speak accounting, when you see a number in brackets, that means that it is negative. And so if you see their profit and loss account in the 1st of January 2022 has brackets 19 million, that means they had negative 19 million, in this case dollars, that had been lost on the game. When they made the decision to entirely review everything and start the game again, they were at $19 million having been spent. Wow, that is simply wild. I cannot imagine spending $20 million almost on something and then deciding not to release it and to double down and make it bigger. That's what the Hypixel Studios management did though, and it would have been a genius move had things not gone how they did, because to be clear, in 2022, they actually ramped up their expenses. They spent $17.6 million this year alone, bringing up their total losses to negative $37 million. They were $37 million in the hole for a game that hadn't been seen yet, and over the year 2023, this actually went up. They spent $38 million this year, bringing their total losses to $75.6 million. These are accounts that have been certified by PwC. These aren't companies just making up losses for the sake of tax benefits. This is a huge amount of money to spend on a game that at this point had no planned date to be made playable, let alone purchasable, but yet at that point you can see even by the end of the account dates we have, which is a year and a half out of date, the Hytale game has spent more than half of what GTA 5 is expected to cost. According to in-game analysts, 250 people working for 5 years will actually end up costing $137 million. That's the GTA 5 expectation. It could be even higher, but the fact that Hytale is in the same conversation as Grand Theft Auto 5, the most expensive game of all time, is something that is nuts. But the fact that GTA 5 is going to come out, and the fact that Hytale is not, is what really makes that a disastrous thing. I think that working out how they spent that much money is something that clearly is going to have to be done by Riot Games, or there's going to have to be a post, a post-mortem of this, really. But what's worth mentioning is the only thing we can see from the public is what they put in their development updates, and in the same development update where they said they were redoing the engine, they actually shared this image of the team. Keep in mind that the team got bigger, also I guess that it's 2022, and so they're wearing masks, but keep in mind that the team did eventually get bigger, and so actually it's not just that they have almost 100 people working there, the number likely got over 100, and so management messed up here, either by hiring far too many people that they couldn't correctly utilize. If you're hiring 100 people and still not producing that much work, then that is a sign that something has gone wrong. You're bloating expenses, or management actually weren't spending that much on people and it was all going into buildings or a caviar fund or something. I don't think that's very likely. I think it is that the management of the studio continuously wanted to build bigger, but without actually creating the systems to do so. I think that it's worth mentioning that getting 100 people or 200 people to coordinate on one project is insanely hard. It has been said and studied many a time, and so to think that you can do that and to think that you can just get in and out real quick is kind of wild, because it's so unsustainable to be burning $40 million a year, but that's exactly what Hypixel Studios did, and so clearly eventually Riot Games, or whoever is funding them, but presumably, we presume it is Riot Games, backed by Tencent, the Chinese publisher, presumably they would say at some point, you are spending $40 million a year and are not giving us a proper idea of when we are going to make that money back, and so after this point we can say that this is one of the most expensive video games never made, and that's absolutely tragic. Speaking of absolutely tragic, there is something else that we can mention here, because although I would say scope creep and management are by far the biggest issues, there is perhaps a darker real reason behind the decline here, because ultimately someone at Riot was still writing the checks until very recently, and so what changed there? Because as much as you can blame management for blowing a bunch of money or spiraling their expectations, ultimately whose money were they blowing? We know it's not their own from selling the game, because well, they made a bit of money from merch, but they weren't getting a giant bank loan, because what bank is going to lend to a company that's 100 million in the red? We know that the money was coming from Riot Games, and Riot Games were happy to continuously give them more, even as they asked for 40 million a year, which means whatever assurances and whatever timelines they were giving Riot were either kept to, or at least kept to enough that they were happy to continue doing this until they weren't. What changed? Well, I think it's likely that Riot Games took a step back and ultimately saw the biggest problem with Hypixel Studios and the Hytale development, which was not necessarily the fact that they were making a game that was getting any worse. I'm sure the game they were developing was getting better and better, but the actual asset that underwrote the entire brand, the reason that they were happy to invest in the first place, was that community hype. And as we can see from this post right here, if we look at the Google Trends, which usually sucks as a way to measure the popularity of a game, but when there is no game to play, this is actually a decent indication of how many people are still curious about Hytale. Obviously, it's at its highest after the trailer. You expect that some number of people watch the trailer and then forget about the game, but what you don't expect is that after about 3 years and this big wave of hype as they make more announcements, for those peaks to get smaller and smaller and smaller as every successive announcement starts to sound more like, I swear the game is coming out soon, guys, you just trust us, give us a little bit more time. And over a period of 7 years, the big asset that made the game so investable, the reputation, started to diminish more and more. There was the blog where you could keep up with it, but obviously this wasn't going to get anywhere nearly as much attention as the base game did, and I think that, the fact that the game had a huge community was a huge boost. There are multiple podcasts, by the way. There's multiple YouTube channels as well. One of the most famous is Quebec Corner, and if we look at Quebec Corner, you can see that even in his YouTube views, the community for the game on YouTube was dying out too. The views go down and down and down, with the only increase being the Hytale is dead announcement. The biggest thing that Hytale has done in years is announce that they've stopped developing it, and that is an absolute tragedy, but it is a reminder for the fact that even if you think you have this ultimate product, even if you think that everyone cares so much about it, I think consumers are ultimately fickle. My own interaction with the subscribers from this channel has been many people saying, sorry, wait, what is Hytale? Could you go back a bit and explain that to me? Why does everyone care about this so much? And the fact that so many people have to ask why and what means that there is a time that you have to actually deliver something, and I think that if we really take all of these things combined, you can see that ultimately, like I've said many a time before, the easiest thing to do is to overpromise and underdeliver. The more you say you're going to do, the harder it is to do all of those things, but equally, it's what people actually want you to do is to deliver something. And sure, if they had delivered in 2022, it wouldn't have been cross-platform. They would have had to rewrite the engine, and maybe people would have mocked it for not being anywhere nearly as good as it was before, but they would have had a product that they could have iterated on and actually improved. They would have had an actual, launch, this moment that they'd have something for people to actually be able to look at, and they would have a source of revenue, presumably coming in exchange for that. But instead, by scrapping it and deciding that they wanted to do big, or they weren't going to do anything at all, they've ultimately done nothing at all, and I think what makes this extra tragic is not the fact that it's a lot of money. It's Riot Games money, which comes from Tencent. It's Chinese investors' money ultimately, and their fault for putting it inside of a studio that weren't going to deliver a game without spending literally $100 million. Ultimately, I don't think that's the tragedy. I think the real tragedy comes partially to the community who had so much excitement for a Minecraft competitor that now will never who actually come into existence, but also the tragedy is for all of the employees. Many people were hired, the team is huge, and all of those people are going to be let go now, and that is why it's important, even as someone who wants to make big, exciting, creative things, sometimes it's important to make something good now and make it better later, because if you wait to make it better, it might never actually come out. And for all the people working on the game, many of whom are greatly talented, if we are to believe the game directors and the CEOs, if we are to believe the management of the company, there are many talented people who lost their job because people kept wanting to make bigger and better and more expensive and crazier, and even though the Hytale that might have come out may have been bigger than GTA 5 and may have actually recouped some of that money, ultimately they had a decision to make, and even though they didn't know it at the time, they made the wrong decision. Sure, they might have looked back on a game that that didn't have cross-platform play, that was slightly harder to update, etc., but they would have released it when people were ready to receive it. Think about 2021, how many more people were playing games. Think about how much closer they were to the trailer. A bad video game can be made. Funnily enough, the slogan used to be a game can only be late early on, and then it can be great forever, but a bad game is bad forever. But nowadays, the philosophy has shifted. With the regularity of updates, you can actually release a bad video game and expect that it will be good, rather than hoping to release a good video game and releasing nothing. which is exactly what has happened with Hytale. Truly a tragedy for everyone involved. I hope they can find work, and I hope that despite the critique of this project, everyone understands that there must be a bunch of talented people. I hope they all get on their feet, and indeed, I hope that we see something emerge from these ashes. I think the most likely thing is probably Reforge, actually, which seems to be taking all of the lessons from Hytale before it's even gone wrong. They have released a very early public build. They are actually iterating with public feedback, and it's not great right now. It's not a Minecraft alternative right now, but clearly it's going in the right direction, and so I have my excitement for that. But what do you think, Internet? I'd love to know your thoughts down below. That's just the generic way people end the video. You know, I don't need to know your thoughts, but I do need to know what you think about that number, because as far as I can tell, we are the first place on the internet to report it. Absolutely staggering to think about how much money has been blown on nothing.